Okay, and we're good to go. So, thanks everyone for joining me today. So I'm here to talk about Qualtrics. Before I get into Qualtrics and what it is and what we can do with it, I'll tell you a little bit about me because it's my favorite topic to talk about here. I am Dr. Alex Russell. I work in the Experimental Gambling Research Lab, and this is our team. That's me down the front, the bald bloke. This is us at a conference recently. I've done a few pretty cool things in the last few years. One is being part of the ABC Top 5 Scientists, which was a lot of fun last year. If you have any ECRs around you, I highly recommend taking part. And if they want to, tell them to get in touch with me. I'll help them with their application. And this year I'm a STEM ambassador as well. So I'll be working with Zali Stegel to bring science to Parliament. So I'm really interested in engaging with people outside of universities as well. That's a lot of what I do. And that sort of ties in as well with the work that we do in Qualtrics too, because I find it a really great platform to create engaging type research. So there are a lot of different ways to gather data. You know, we can go and do focus groups or interviews. We can get people to come into the lab. We can do, you know, other face-to-face data collection type things, or we can do online surveys, and there's plenty of other things too. But at the moment with COVID-19 going on, there's a lot of these things that aren't available to us. So, you know, having people come into the lab, probably not going to be happening for a little while. Getting people to come together into a big focus group is also going to be pretty tricky. So online surveys offer a lot of opportunities for us to do things to make up for things that we can't do right now. So online surveys offer these great opportunities because there's no physical proximity or contact with people. They're usually really easy to set up, but it depends on how complex you want to be. I'm going to show you some of the surveys that we've done that can be really quite complex and interesting as well. And they can get a little bit more complex there too. They're generally really easy for participants to do. That should be your goal in setting up an online survey, to make it as easy as possible for the participants to complete. And at the moment, there are a lot of people who are bored at home. So we're getting a lot of survey responses through right now. It's a really good time to be doing surveys. So you've all seen surveys before, right? Here's a really boring example kind of survey for, say, restaurant satisfaction. I think this one is, you know, there's those kind of yes, no questions at the start. There are things like overall satisfaction of various aspects of the restaurant, like the price or the location, those sorts of things, and even an open-ended question there. And this is what most people tend to think of when they think of surveys, just kind of a dumb instrument where you're just going to collect a whole bunch of data, maybe report descriptives, maybe do some correlations. And that's about all that they're going to do. And in fact, when you look at textbooks and you go to things like what is a survey, they describe them as non-experimental research designs and kind of play them down a lot. You know, particularly for psychologists, we like experimental stuff. So surveys are kind of looked down on a little bit. But what if I told you you could do experiments in Qualtrics? Well, let me show you. So I'm going to show you some of our research that we've done to give you an idea of the kind of things that can be done in Qualtrics. It's going to take you a little while before you're able to do these things when you start with Qualtrics, but I'm also putting together a series of videos to help train people on these sorts of things too, to show you how we've done them. They'll be available on StaffNet, on Research Moodle, various other places as well, and just on my general YouTube channel as well. So most of the surveys that I'm going to talk about here, or all of the surveys I'm talking about here, have been done in Qualtrics. You can, of course, use other platforms like SurveyMonkey or Lime Survey or Google Forms or anything like that for a really standard kind of survey. But if you want to do anything kind of interesting, Qualtrics is the place to go. Just a really big disclaimer here, I talk Qualtrics up a lot. We use it a lot. They don't pay me to do that, but they did once give me a pair of Qualtrics basketball shorts, so I feel like I've got to disclose that. All right, so here's a study we were doing on wagering inducements. You've seen these things like, deposit $50 in your account and we'll match it. We'll give you a $50 bonus bet, for example. And we wanted to see what happens to people's betting behavior when they see different types of inducements. Are any particular types of inducements, because there's a lot of different ones out there, more influential on someone's gambling behavior compared to others? So we did this within Qualtrics. We got people to actually bet on simulated contests. We staked them the money. We couldn't get them to bet their own money. But if they won, they actually kept the winnings. That was their incentive for taking part in the study. And we wanted to randomize people here as well. We wanted to randomly allocate them to see, the different types of inducements in different orders. So randomization means we're dealing with an experimental design. we can do experiments in Qualtrics, which isn't something you can easily do in things like SurveyMonkey or Lime Survey. So instead of getting people to come into the lab to do an experiment, we can do it online really easily. So we had 5 inducements that we were doing here. So bonus bets, better odds and winnings, cashback, and a couple of others there too. And we also got them to watch different matches. So we had, for example, the Sydney Swans playing the Geelong Cats. We had AFL, we also had cricket, we also had soccer. We programmed all of these things into the survey so that they could choose what sport they wanted to see, whatever was most appropriate for them. And we wanted to randomize which inducement was lined up with which match as well. So there's a lot of randomization going on in here. The programming is actually not too bad behind the scenes. This is what it looked like for them. They were given this inducement up the top in this blue box, and they were asked to bet on, you know, one of the teams to win and by how much. The idea being that if they're betting on a team to win by 43 points as opposed to 1 point in an AFL match, that's a pretty unlikely outcome, right? But if that were to come true, then they would get a much better payout. And the idea was do certain inducements, make them select these riskier bets more often. Less chance of winning, but more chance of getting a higher payout if it comes true. Now, we wanted to make this really engaging as well. So we actually wanted them to watch a little bit of a highlight reel of the match. So we could download, you know, some footage of an AFL game or a cricket match or whatever from YouTube and get them to watch that. But we realized that if we gave them, you know, a real AFL game to watch, that copyright is going to be an issue. But also they might realize that, you know, I've seen this game before, you know, they're using recent games and all that sort of thing. So instead, I played Xbox for a week and recorded myself playing AFL and cricket and soccer. And my brother cut it, he's a video editor, he cut it up into a highlights reel. And people found it like the most engaging survey they've ever done. And a lot of them said, where can I take part in more of your research? Sort of more importantly than that, we got really good results out of it too. We found that, you know, particular types of inducements, cash rebates in particular, were the most likely to lead to taking riskier kind of bets. And this has been published and all these sorts of things. And it's been described as, you know, one of the most, some of the most convincing evidence yet on gambling advertising's negative effects on gamblers' behaviors, which is, you know, a pretty good outcome for all of us. So a really engaging survey, right? We've got videos in there, we've got randomization. We're running a true experiment rather than just a boring survey. But we're just doing it through a survey platform because Qualtrics allows us to do that. Let me show you another example here. I'm just going to mute someone there, sorry. Let me show you another example here. This is an honors student, right? Honors level student doing some stuff in a Qualtrics survey. And this one blows everyone's mind when I show it them. So if you look at a pokie interface, right? There's not much information here. We have how many credits are available to bet. We have what your next bet size is going to be and how much you've just won. And that's about it. So when you win some money, it gets recycled into your credits here. And it's really hard to keep track of your play. It's hard to keep track of your winnings. So most people just keep betting on a pokie until their credits hit 0. So we thought, what could happen here if we change the interface a little bit? So we wanted to program our own pokie. And we did. Because Qualtrics allows JavaScript extensions, JavaScript functionality. So you can find anything that's written in JavaScript and pop it into a survey. So we went Googling and found a JavaScript pokie. And this is what it looked like. And it actually worked within the survey. So we had 2 different options here, one with the standard credit bet win interface, and then some other things down here that tracked how much time they played and where their winnings were up to and those sorts of things. And then we asked them some questions, like halfway through the experiment, we'd stop the pokie and we'd say, all right, how much time have you been playing? And we'd line that up against how much time they'd actually been playing. And of course, the people who had that information were much better at giving accurate information versus those who weren't. So it's a really cool experiment. You know, people were randomly allocated to conditions here and actually played a pokie for us within a survey. So you've never seen anything like this in a survey before, have you? It's quite cool and different and interesting. And that's why we like it. And again, we've published with an honors student in a Q1 journal because it's wicked research. There are lots of other JavaScript tools around. So for psychologists like myself, there are go, no-go tasks or Stroop tasks, all programmed in JavaScript, ready to go. If you've got a program or a type of tool that you regularly use, you don't have to program it from scratch yourself. You can grab something that's already programmed, just do a quick Google or look on GitHub or something like that, and download the JavaScript and pop it in your survey ready to go. So like I said, I'll have some videos showing you how to do JavaScript extensions in Qualtrics coming soon. Another honest student, we wanted them to, we were looking at stigma reduction. This is actually the wife of the previous honest student who did the pokies one as well. I love CQU, it's just a big family, right? So we want to do some stuff on stigma reduction. We wanted to try 3 different approaches. So education, you know, this is why people experience gambling problems. Advocacy, which is gambling industry is bad. And contact, which is here are gambling, people experiencing gambling problems telling their stories to see which ones reduce stigma the most. So we'd capture some questions about stigma beforehand, and then we'd randomly allocate them to 1 of 3 interventions, and then we'd ask them the same questions afterwards. So we've got before and after. We also had a control intervention there too. So we have, you know, measures before and measures after with randomly allocated interventions in the middle. Again, we're running a really nice experiment here. The intervention were videos. So we showed them videos sourced from YouTube. That we had edited a bit and uploaded to YouTube as well. So, you know, really engaging kind of tools here. And again, we published. And one more to show you that's really kind of handy here too is one of my studies that I led. So with this one, what we're trying to understand is connections between people around you. And we can start off the question by asking, you know, who are the 20 most influential people in your lives? Tell us their names. So Steph and Tommy and Max are my family. And then later in the survey, we can take whatever their answers were and pipe them through into subsequent questions. So we can go, all right, so before you told me that Steph and Tommy are 2 of the most influential people in your lives, how well do they know each other? So you can take previous answers and use them later in the survey and so much more. So it's a really powerful thing. This is using a combination of things called embedded data and piped text. And again, videos to come on this to explain it all to you with worked examples. And I'll have surveys and survey scripts available for you to see as well. And that was cool. We got some really nice stuff out of it. And if you want to see me talking about social network analysis and how it works and everything, there's a video here. These slides I'll make up available. I'll send them to Stu and they can make them somewhere. There are plenty of other tools and guides around in terms of you know, using Qualtrics to make life easy for you. So if you want to use something like an implicit association task, someone's gone one step better than just giving you JavaScript, and they've actually set up a website here that you can go to. You can design your implicit association task within it and then actually download a pre-programmed survey ready to go, and you can upload that into Qualtrics. So the whole survey is written for you, and you can add the extra questions around it, like, you know, gender and age and the information sheet and all that sort of thing. But the key of it is done. And when you want to analyze this, you just download your data and pop it into the analyze tab, and it does all the analyses for you too. It's pretty incredible, some of the things that people are making available around Qualtrics as well. All right, so, and this is, again, something that I've been using with honours students. So, you know, with Ellie here did an IAT on fruit. We were looking at peaches and summer fruits. And I have a student who did it with sports betting and race betting as well, to see if the association between sports and gambling is now about as strong as racing and gambling. And again, got some really nice results out of it. So Qualtrics, the thing I'm trying to get across to you here is this really powerful platform. It's more than just surveys. It's you know, there's a lot of really powerful things you can do in it if you know they exist. So that's why I like giving these talks. There are a lot of guides around to help you design experiments as well. And, you know, a lot of different tools that are going on. And there's a really engaged community as well, just called the Qualtrics community, where you can go and ask questions. If you're a beginner, I don't understand this, and someone will give you some examples or point you in the right direction there too. So Up until now, CQU has had a license for the School of Health, Medical and Applied Sciences only. We are now moving to a CQU license. My understanding is that this will be available to everyone, including students, including undergrad students. So everyone of all levels in CQU has access to it. They can run as many surveys as they want with as many respondents as they can get. There are no limits on our license. It's launching tomorrow, I believe. So look for emails coming from the research office here and an IT, someone in IT as well. I'll be, like I said, we'll have sites that are available in StaffNet and RHD Moodle and various things like that, where I'll be posting regular videos, uploading stuff. And I'm really, like if you have something that you specifically want to see how it's done, send it to me and I'll make a video out of it so that everyone can learn from it. Okay, some of these videos will be really beginner stuff, like here's how you start a survey, and here's how you program a question, and this is what a block is versus a question, for example. Some will be more intermediate, and some will be really quite advanced as well. And it's okay, you don't have to do advanced stuff in Qualtrics. You can just do your basic run-of-the-mill surveys, and that's okay. But if you want to do some advanced stuff, I'll show you how to do it. All right, so this is what the interface looks like when you go into Qualtrics. You'll see probably when you first log in, you'll have absolutely no surveys here. But for me, I've got about 135 different surveys going at the moment. And you can also categorize them. You can put them in folders over here. So when you start getting to, as many surveys as I've got, it's really handy to be able to pop them into folders and things over here. When you first log in, you see some really basics about what's going on with this survey as well. So for example, this survey is active, people can get into it. It's got 69 questions and it's got 2,000 responses, right? This one's actually one that I finished. I just haven't worried about closing it off. But yeah, it's a really nice snapshot overview of things. If I were to click on that, then this is what a survey looks like when I get in. So these are question blocks, which are like the building blocks of your survey. And within a block, we've got one or more questions. So a block early on for my information sheet, it's not actually a question, it's just some text that I'm displaying to people in a consent form. But then when I get down to demographics, for example, I've got 8 questions in that block as well. And where this becomes really useful is being able to set the flow of the survey. Who sees which questions? So I've got some questions here around gambling behavior, for example, and then I might have some questions around whether you've ever sought help because of gambling problems. Now, I only want to ask people if they've sought help for gambling problems if I think they have gambling problems. There's no point asking someone who doesn't gamble, for example. So you can set up what we call a survey flow. Who sees which questions based on their previous answers? And survey flow is where the magic happens in, sorry, this is really quickly what some questions look like, for example. So I've got some stuff here. I'm only going to display the PGSI, which is a problem gambling tool, a measure, to people who have said that they've gambled. Makes sense. In the first video that will be uploaded, probably tonight, we'll talk about setting up these questions and some tips and tricks from me in terms of setting these up so that your analysis later on is so much easier. But here is survey flow. At the top of your screen, you'll see this little button, and this is where the magic happens, right? This is where we do randomization. This is where we can decide who sees certain questions. So this, for example, is how I might screen someone out of the survey. If they've said no to consent in the consent block, then I do a little branch here. Anyone who has said, I do not consent, I've set up some embedded data here so that I know why I've kicked them out of the survey, right? There'll be a new variable in there called GC, which is, stands for good complete, so shorthand that we use. And they've been terminated because, which sounds so clinical, I know. They've been terminated because they didn't give consent. And then they're booted out of the survey, right? There's this end of survey element here. So that's how we kick people out of the survey. But we don't have to use branches just for kicking people out of the survey. We could use a branch here to say, if they've gambled, then show them the PGSI and then show them help-seeking questions, for example. So survey flow is a really important thing to learn, and it's not that hard. All of these are just our question blocks and then some information about who sees which question blocks. Once you understand this, then you can do pretty much everything in Qualtrics. I'm going to give some general tips for online surveys I'm going to run through this fairly quickly. The recording for this will be available. I think looking around, a lot of people who are here have done surveys before, will understand a lot of this already. So, don't stress if this is all a bit boring. There'll be some more stuff after that's hopefully not boring. The best tip I can give you first up is to design your survey before you start programming in Qualtrics. So a lot of people just jump in and start programming their survey straight away. It's best if you have a Word document or something to work off to begin with. So you can, create notes to yourself. All right, I'm going to have this question here about whether they live in Australia or not, and I'm going to screen them out if they're not from Australia. Now, on that as well, you can also look up their location based on their IP address too, and you can use that to screen them out if they're not in Australia too. Just because they told you they're in Australia doesn't mean they actually are. For age, I want to accept values from 0 to 110. I'm going to be optimistic. I'm going to say 110-year-olds are interested in taking my gambling survey, so I'll allow that. But anything above that, I'm going to assume is probably not, an accurate age. So I'll only allow those numbers, and if they're under 18, then I'll screen them out. So you can set up validation on questions here too. It's always really good to have some screening questions at the start of the survey. So these are these ones like consent and all that. If you start screening people out halfway through the survey or, after a long time, that's when you start getting complaints. That's when ethics starts getting complaints, and that's when you get in trouble. So always just try and work out who you need and screen them out as early as possible so you're not wasting their time. Question wording is a really big thing. This sort of goes without saying, but I kind of like talking about it in these things because I can use examples from a Donald Trump survey. So these are some examples of some really bad questions that were asked. Some biased questions here, for example. So do you believe that the media creates false feuds within our party to make us seem divided? Well, if that's not leading, I don't know what is. The next one's even better, which is, do you believe the media uses slurs rather than facts to attack conservative stances on issues like border control, religious liberties, and Obamacare? So, really highly leading kind of questions here, written exactly for the kind of answers that they wanted. The problem was with this particular survey, a whole bunch of Democrats and foreigners got on it and just, really screwed up the results for them, which was kind of fun. Loaded questions, same kind of deal. Just be really aware of your question wording. It seems like writing a survey should be a really easy thing to do, but the first time that you do it, it's actually not that simple. So in particular, try and avoid industry speak. Sometimes you're not going to be able to get around it. So if you need to do that, then give people a little bit of a definition. So we were talking about simulated gambling on a recent study, for example, and we spelled out what simulated gambling is. You can play a gambling-like game. You can even pay to play them, but you can't win any money. So it's sort of simulated gambling, even if it costs you money to play, the key thing being that you can't win any money. All right, so give people definitions if you really need to do that, but try and avoid it in the first place. Avoid yes, no, go for scales if you possibly can. I do a lot of statistics and I can tell you that yes, no questions don't give you too much information. But if you go for scales instead, where possible, try and use those and your life will be a lot easier later on. Pilot your survey. Qualtrics has some really good piloting tools available. So you can send a preview link out to people so you can clearly see who was testing your survey for you versus real data when it comes to analysing things. And get people to sit there. I usually say to my honours students and PhD students to buy a friend a beer or a wine or coffee or whatever works for them. Get them to sit there and do the survey with a pad and pencil and make a note about any questions that they didn't understand. And then you can look at that and see if you need to rewrite any questions. You can do open-ended questions. So potentially you can do some qualitative stuff within Qualtrics as well. So if I were to ask people to, tell me what is your opinion about the current Australian Prime Minister and gave them a big text box to type in, some people are going to fill that text box. They're going to write a lot of stuff. But other people probably aren't. And a lot of the time with these open-ended questions, most people don't really type very much at all. So you can use it for limited qualitative work, but you need to make sure that there's some pretty good incentives there to get people to actually give you some details. It's usually better to use it for quantitative type things. So instead of, reading through columns of text and drawing out all the themes and all that kind of thing, it might be easier to think about, you know, some of the questions that you want to ask, like a strong leader or competent and hardworking, and, you know, rate them on Likert scales instead. Keep your survey short. We find about 15 minutes is a pretty good upper limit, and that is a stretch. 20 if you need to, and especially if you're paying people, 20 will do okay, but otherwise up to 10 is a really good place to go. So when you're looking at your survey, agonize over every single question, and if there are some that you can drop, then just drop them. Like if there are nice to have questions, for example, but you don't really need them and your survey's long, then look at cutting them. And then finally, people do weird things in surveys. You're going to find that occasionally your surveys will get hit by a bot or something like that, you know, and you'll find all these crazy survey responses in there, or people get bored. If your survey isn't particularly interactive, people will get bored and tune out halfway through. So do have a look at your data to start off with. Open-ended responses can be really useful here because people will just mash their keyboard, for example, and that's a really good sign that they're not paying attention to the survey. They're just doing something to get through it. So you might consider removing their responses before you do all of your analyses. Also look for straight lining. This is people, like if you give them a table, you know, strongly disagree to strongly agree, just doing the same answer down the page because it's easy to do. I have a broader tips document available on Google Docs. And again, we'll make the slides and this link available to everybody too. I'll ask you to send it around to everyone. And at the moment, this talks about an HMAS license, which is going to disappear in the not too distant future because we have the CQUni license. We don't need both. But it has some things here about, you know, using Qualtrics and tips, and it has links to Qualtrics support documents too. Qualtrics support documents are really useful too. If you Google Qualtrics survey flow, it gives you these pages that just cover everything that you need to know. And if that's not good enough, or you need something in particular, there is phone support available too. As part of our license, we're able to call Qualtrics and say, I don't understand this. And they will say, okay, cool, what are your login details, you know, or what is your email address? And they can log into your account, have a look at the survey and see what's going on. So, you know, by all means, consider the support options here too. A really important note with Qualtrics is that our data is stored in Australia, not overseas. With SurveyMonkey, it's not. And this is a big problem for, I think, Queensland government funding in particular. Certain forms of it anyway, will are going to have a real problem going forward about data that's stored offshore. So Qualtrics gets around this, and Qualtrics data security is, you know, pretty awesome. There's no, what am I trying to say here? Any security that exists, there's probably a way around it, right? But Qualtrics has the highest level of security and they continuously look at it as well. It doesn't mean that they're completely immune to breaches. No one is. We've seen breaches with some of the biggest companies around, but they're as immune as they possibly can be, and certainly much higher levels of security than a lot of other survey companies. So they see security as their biggest thing. All right, so making surveys engaging. Some of the things that you want to consider there are branch and display and skip logic. Who sees which questions? You can set quotas as well. You can make it so that if you wanted to have 1,000 people in your survey and you wanted a roughly even mix of males and females, for example, you could set a quota for males and females at 50% each, for example. Response validation, so making sure that people are giving you the answers that you need before they move on. People actually kind of like that. It's surprising because it shows that you're taking the survey seriously. Whereas if they can just start entering anything into the survey and continue, then they kind of switch off and don't pay attention. So some people do have a little bit of a test early on with the survey too. You can use geolocation with IP addresses to make sure that they are where they say that they are, and you can screen people out if they're not in Australia based on that too. But email triggers is a beautiful one. Whoops. So if I want to send people an email when they finish the survey, I can ask them for their email address in the survey, and then I can send them an automatic thank you email. This is really good. At the moment, we're doing a survey to take abstracts for a conference that we're maybe going to be running in Melbourne in October, depending. And the idea is that people are entering in their abstracts and their email address and contact details and everything. And then we send them an email straight away, which tells them, hey, this is the information that you've given us. We've received it. And it all happens automatically behind the scenes. And these emails can have CQU branding in them and all that too. They're just an HTML form that you can set up. And you know, piping people's responses through. So for example, we've asked people how much you spend per week on gambling. Later on, we can give them some feedback on that. And really get people like feedback in surveys about their responses. So we could say, you said you spent $50 per week on gambling. People your age and gender, they're saying 30. So have a think about that, hey? People like feedback in their surveys about their answers. So you can make these things really interactive, which also means that these can be a really good, useful tool for learning, for teaching. So I'm looking at using some of these for statistics tests, for example, or statistics practice exercises. You know, here's the thing you need to do: download this file, enter your answer here. Your answer's incorrect. Here's why, and here's what you should have done. You know, well, your answer's correct. Well done. You know, and 73% of students got this correct. You know, so you can give this, you know, really engaging feedback to people. Really powerful tool in Qualtrics as well is being able to preview your survey. So this is what it looks like. I've set up a survey here and run a little preview here, and I can see what it looks like both on a desktop on the left and on a mobile device on the right. And you can see that Qualtrics scales automatically to the different screen sizes here. So you can tell straight away if something's not going to look good on mobile phones. Keep in mind now that most people finish their surveys on mobile phones, not on desktops or laptops. So, you know, seeing this here is really important. And you can run through as many previews as you like. So if this is a way to test, for example, skip logic, if people give this answer, then they shouldn't be asked this next question. And you can see if that's working using the preview here. But one of the other things that I really love in terms of testing, and this makes my life so much easier, is the ability to run test responses through a survey. So if when I'm in my survey view, click on Tools, Review, and then Generate Test Responses here, what this does is, you know, I might set it to run 100 responses through the survey, and it will just select answers at random, right? So it's completely random answering. And, you know, if it hits a text box, it'll add in, you know, those Latin phrases like lorem ipsum, you know, the placeholder text they used to use on printing presses. That's what it'll add in. And it's a way to test if your skip logic is working. Right? So if I run 100 random responses through the survey and 73 of them give this particular answer, then 73 of them should see the next question if that's what the logic was. So I can test it by running, you know, a lot of test responses here. I'll usually run a few thousand through. You can usually run about 1,000 or 2,000 at a time. So I'll often run like 12 or 16 or 20,000 through, just to make sure that I cover all possible branch options, because my surveys tend to be quite complex. So you can download those data, run it through some analyses, and see if your logic is working, rather than having to work through the preview and do every possible skip and every possible branch. So this is a really powerful little tool here too. Question validation. So there are some automatic validation things set up. So for example, entering postcode, I'll get people to type in their postcode. I'll make it a forced response. They can't go ahead without actually filling in an answer in here. And then I'll validate the content type to make sure that they're typing something that's useful. So I don't want them typing their suburb, for example. I want them typing a number. And I want it to be a 4-digit number that looks like an Australian postal code. So a lot of these things are built in here too. In terms of recruiting people, you can recruit people to Qualtrics surveys from anywhere. You can post survey links on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit or Whirlpool or Gumtree. We have a lot of great success with all of these, particularly for honours students who don't have a recruitment budget. You know, we tend to get a few hundred per survey, and it works really well. And of course, you can send them out to family and friends if needs be. But Qualtrics can also recruit for you too. If you have a recruitment budget, then this is a separate service to the survey platform, where they don't have any of their own market research panels, but they will go to a bunch of partner research panels and recruit for you. It's a paid service. I generally find that, you know, they're not as cheap as things like MTurk, but they're usually a lot cheaper than going directly to the market research panels themselves. and they can source from multiple research panels. So if you need a really big survey for something and any one panel isn't going to be able to give you that number, they'll go, all right, we'll go to 4 or 5 or 6 panels, and we'll make it so that people are deduplicated across panels, because a lot of people are on multiple panels too. So I won't, if I go to 6 panels, I'm not going to have the same person completing the survey 6 times because they happen to be on all those panels. So, there's more and more tools that Qualtrics can do beyond just the survey as well. So look, I've covered a lot there, and I've covered it pretty quickly, and there's obviously a lot more that I could go into as well. But what I've tried to show you is the kind of things that Qualtrics can do that other platforms just can't do, and the kind of really cool research that we're doing that gets us excited, but also gets participants excited to take part. They really do love it, particularly when there is that feedback and engagement going on within a survey. I'll try to show you some of the tools that will be useful for you when you're designing your surveys. So like the ability to test surveys and how to do it, for example. And I'll try to show you some other things in the middle there that I kind of forgot about because that was a while ago now. So I'd love to hear any questions from any of you. And thanks for listening.
Alex, I have a question. I'm interested to know whether Qualtrics will allow for audio responses to open-ended questions.
I'm not sure. I've never looked into it. They do have some things in terms of being able to upload files. So you could make it so that people, record an audio clip on their computer and then upload that, for example. But in terms of whether you can upload an audio file directly in the survey, I've never looked into it, to be honest. Yeah.
No, it's sort of more like if someone, almost voice recognition type thing, where they can actually say, for example, your question, what do you think of the current Prime Minister? They could actually answer in 3 sentences or something, as distinct from actually uploading a file.
Well, let's go and have a look. There we go. There's a question here about, is there a voice capture feature in Qualtrics? Here's the Qualtrics community. Let's go and see. I can guarantee you that any question that you have about Qualtrics, someone else has asked at some point, because this is being used everywhere, all over the world by a lot of people. Academics in particular are getting on board now, but it's also used by market research companies, really big companies. So here we go. Is there anything there? It doesn't look like it at the moment, but there is a page on Stack Overflow, which is a tool there that like a community that might have some information there. So here we go. It looks like there is some audio recording availability through HTML5, and Qualtrics can run HTML5, JavaScript, and things like that. So it looks like it could be possible, but you probably need to look into that a little bit more, and you can have a chat to Qualtrics support, again, to see if there's anything there. But it sounds like a really good idea, and if it's not a feature, one thing I have found is that they're really responsive. If there's been a few times now when I've gone to them and said, the platform can't do this, this would be really useful, here's why. And I've usually found in a couple of months that a change has been made and something more has become available. So one thing, for example, is making an API available so that people can, do a bit even more with the functionality, and that's just coming online now too. So at the moment, I'm not sure about capturing audio, but again, that sounds like a really great idea. So yeah, I would follow up with them and ask.
Alex, a question, Ross Chapman here. A question about exporting data, collated data from a Qualtrics survey. What formats are available to export data?
So that's a really good question. So I'll show you. Why don't I log into Qualtrics and show you what my interface looks like, and talk about that. So the main options are things like CSV and and those sorts of things, comma separated values. But you can also download in an SPSS file. And this is what I strongly recommend. Even if you're not using SPSS, even if you're using R or something like that, I would recommend, downloading in SPSS, because then the response values, 1 and 2 and 3, are coded with their response options, response labels, so male and female, for example. So just do a really quick login, and I'll show you the download tab. I'll also show you how to distribute your survey here, how to get the link from it as well. So it just takes a little second here. And I'll even open up the data set for you so you can get a sense of what's going to be in there. I have done this in the video that I'm making available tomorrow or Friday, talk through all this as well. I wasn't sure I'd have time in this talk, so I didn't make it in the slides. Right. So if I go to my social network analysis survey, can just take a second, sorry. All right, so here's my survey here. It's loading up. Now you'll see, you know, here are all my blocks, and I can expand my blocks and see the questions within that block, for example. Just show you my survey flow really quickly as well. I use a lot of embedded data. These are the green ones here because these are notes to myself for later on, you know, why this person's been kicked out of the survey or whether this person's a gambler or not, those sorts of things. And then up the top here, I've got my distributions tab. This is where I go to get my survey link to send out to people. And you can do a lot of stuff with survey links too. So you can customize them a little bit to actually capture data off people too. So you could use one particular type of link for Twitter and a different one for Facebook, for example, and the survey will be able to capture where they came from. But here's my anonymous link that I would use. And you can also email people directly from within Qualtrics too. In terms of downloading the data, I go into data and analysis. And you'll see straight away that there will be some data available to see, and you can determine what columns you want to see out of that as well. So it's just indexing that at the moment. It'll also show me that there might be some responses in progress. This is a bit of an older survey, so there's no responses in progress at the moment. But you can see, you know, some people who have sort of started it but haven't finished it yet. Usually they have a week to complete it, so once they start it as well. But so when I go here, I can export my data, and here are my export options. So CSV, TSV, I can take it out in Excel if I want. And if I'm doing it in Excel, I have the choice of getting the numeric values, you know, 0, 1, 2, or I have the option of the choice text, male, female, so on. The better one to download is the choice text, male or female, because then you know what the values mean. But it also means that your analysis is going to be really annoying because you're going to have to recode each of those as a numeric variable to be able to do regressions and ANOVAs and things like that. And trust me, I've had a lot of honest students who've come to me and said, I've downloaded my data, how do I analyze it? And I said, you need to go and re-download your data. And also people have come to me with old data sets where they don't have access to the survey anymore for whatever reason, the person might have left. So I would strongly recommend downloading via SPSS. So when you download it, just download all the fields and let's have a look at what it looks like. So I'll open SPSS here for you. So one of the things as well that I'm making available is I have a script that I use. So I often use R myself. I have a script for importing SPSS data files into R automatically. And it will capture things like the labels and the values and all that sort of stuff too, and have it pretty ready for analysis. So that will be available alongside the video that's coming soon. So data's just downloading at the moment. They do tend to be big data sets. You know, if I've got 2,000 people in there and this one has a lot of different variables in it, it can take a little while to download. And you'll also find that it includes people who haven't completed the survey in there too. So people have dropped out halfway through. So that's why I set those little embedded data things to say, all right, someone has finished the survey. I'm going to put a value into the data set to say that they've finished the survey. So I use GC equals 1 for that, good complete. And then I can do a filter on my data to say that, all right, anyone who has GC equals 1, these are people who have completed the survey and I'm interested in their data. Everyone else can go away. All right.
So Alex, sorry, that lag time we're experiencing is mostly due to the size of the data set. Is that the?
And a little bit that I'm in Sydney and there's a lot of people online right now. So it's probably more of that than anything. But here we go. Here's my data set, and you'll see that at the start of the data there is start time, start date, which includes a time component to it, and end date. It captures their IP address that they took it from. It's usually good just having a check of your IP addresses to see if you have like 100 that have come from one IP address, for example. How far they've gone through the survey, how long it took them to do it, their duration, you know, really good for reporting in journals, for example, and a unique response ID here too, which is just a unique identifier for everybody. But here are my data. So consent here, for example, right, did not consent, and then this person was not asked any more questions. which is exactly what should have happened. Did consent, and then they were asked these questions here. Now this is stored with a label, but also with the value. So, 1 and 5, or strongly agree and strongly disagree. And when I go into variable view and have a look at the back end here, all of my labels come through nicely. So, 1 is not in the past year. These are the gambling frequency ones. 2 is less than once a month. So that when I run my descriptives on that, so I'll do a quick one, frequency descriptives, on any of those gambling frequency variables, for example, right, it's all set up. It all comes out with my labels ready to go. So it makes life really easy in that respect. So I would recommend downloading SPSS data sets, even if you're not going to use SPSS for analysis, because at least you've got your values and your value labels stored together. It'll make life a lot easier for you down the track.
So Alex, can I just clarify? It's Lucinda here.
Hello.
Hello. You didn't put any of your labels or anything into SPSS beforehand.
No.
So we don't have to go in and do that. It just does that automatically.
That's right.
So a huge amount of time.
Yeah. That's why we like it. So I'll go back to the survey and show you how you, when you enter those things, it will enter the labels automatically, and it will do the coding, the numbers 1, 2, 3, and all that sort of thing on the back end. Sometimes you'll want to adjust that coding as well on the back end to make sure that it sort of works for you. So let me go to, let's go to the PGSI. All right, now the PGSI here, this is a scale that we use. And this is set up as never, sometimes, most of the time, and almost always. Those are the response options that the participant sees, and those are the labels that carry over into my data set. So when I run my analysis for one of these questions, that's exactly what the responses will be. Now, by default, Qualtrics makes whatever the first one is 1, and then 2, and then 3, and sometimes that's what you want, and sometimes it's not. So if I need to change something, there's an option over here, there's a gear, and I can, it's just saying, there's some people have taken this survey, don't change it, but this is old data, so it doesn't matter. So sorry, let me just reload that again. So it's, again, it's good, it's got some warnings to it. So gear, and then there's this option here, recode values. All right, and you can see that I've changed this so that people who selected never, they're not coded as 1, they're coded as 0, because that's the way that the PGSI is coded. Now, and that means that my data, when I look at the PGSI, so I'll just run a really quick descriptives on PGSI here, for example. So analyze descriptives, and like on one of those PGSI items, here we go. Here we go, 0 is never, and 1 is sometimes, and 2 is most of the time, and 3 is almost always. Now, the reason that I've done this is because I actually wanted to score the PGSI within Qualtrics, within the survey, while people were doing it. And this was something that we wanted to do in SurveyMonkey, but we found that we couldn't do it. And it's one of the major reasons that we moved to Qualtrics. So the PGSI, there are 9 questions, all scored 0 to 3. So you can get a score between 0 and 27. And anyone who scores 8 or more is what we classify as a problem gambler. So I might want to score this scale in the survey, for example, by just adding up whatever their scores are on these items, which I can do in survey flow, and then use that information to say anyone who scores more than 8 on this PGSI scale, I'm going to ask them some questions about help seeking, because these are the people who I need to ask questions. So this ability to score a scale within a survey is something that has made the world of difference for us, because it means that our surveys can be more in depth for particular people. So, again, just the more you dig into this, the more you can do with it. And I find that, pretty incredible.
Alex, I've just got a question, so I've got to go in a minute. I'm doing my research overseas. With COVID at the moment, it's sort of restricted international travel, so I won't be on site in the Solomon Islands anymore for the survey component of it. The technology in the Solomon Islands is absolutely terrible, even though they've got NBN, but they still can use the internet, but we've only got a sort of 20% people who have actually got access to the internet, which is sort of a bit of a problem. And then users are only 15% of who can actually use internet technology over there. But I'm just wondering, in terms of data, does SurveyMonkey or otherwise Qualtrics, do they require more data for the person to actually complete the survey?
I don't know. Short answer, I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
Not sure?
The interface for Qualtrics, though, is pretty clean. Like, a lot of the processing that happens, like, it's just a web page, right? All of the processing that happens, so in terms of scoring someone's PGSI or display logic and all that kind of thing, that all happens on the back end. What I would suggest that you do, though, in terms of wherever you end up using doing your survey, is minimizing page loads. So minimizing how many times a new page needs to load. So what you can do in Qualtrics, let me show you, between each question, for example, you can add a page break, right? So that, you know, one page is going to load and this is the question they're going to see. And then there's going to be another page load and then they're going to see this question. What you could do is you could take away as many of those page breaks as possible and give them big, long pages with lots of questions on them, because the data there is every time you download a page or upload it, right? So if they're doing that less, then that's going to solve you some problems there. In terms of which one's less data, I don't know. Sorry.
Okay, my other question, sorry, I've got to go in a minute. My other question is, with COVID-19 and the travel restrictions, it's messed everything up. But so there's a survey component of my research, and the other thing is is focus groups, which will have they'll have questions about the survey findings in them. Would Qualtrics, I saw your earlier example where it's got agree, disagree, neither agree with the different elements, that table format. Has that been used for focus groups before, is it just purely for surveys? I'm just wondering if I put it online and then everyone logged into it and then selected, you know, can it be used as an interactive forum like that?
Well, potentially, but I mean, then you're kind of not necessarily doing a focus group. I mean, the idea of focus groups is having a discussion amongst each other, and, you know, having sort of strongly disagree and strongly agree options in there doesn't necessarily get that interaction going. But you can certainly use it for an interactive kind of forum potentially. But it sounds like that's also going to use a lot of bandwidth too. So
Now, what I was wondering is, you know, I want quantitative and qualitative data out of it. The other thing with the Pacific Islanders is there's this sort of, you know, the shame factor of people not being able to say what they want in front of other people within a focus group forum, which takes, you know, careful facilitation and observation, but there's other ways of getting data as well, and that could be potentially, if you could put the two together, it'll give you a sort of greater analysis point, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot of opportunities here. You have to sort of balance what you're trying to get out of the focus group with what you can reasonably get out of a survey as well. You know, but I think that's a thing. Yeah, you're gonna have to work through a little bit. By all means, contact me and I'll see if I can help. But you know,
sure. I've just been thinking about it. It's just initial thinking. I haven't tested it. It just came to mind just then.
Yeah, no hassle.
I'm just trying to get around this COVID thing at the moment. So
we all are. Yeah. It's a trouble. But you know, I think
I can't travel.
Yeah, I can see Mohammed's got a hand up there, and then I've got a question in the chat from Ian. So
Thank you.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for your presentation. It was really helpful. Just a quick question. You have demonstrated like quantitative data, but let's say if we use the software for qualitative, and we need to export it to in vivo instead of SPSS. Would that be possible? Or?
Not that I'm aware of, but what you would do is you would download the data into SPSS. So there we go. And, you know, let's say I've got some open-ended questions in here. I can run some descriptives on them and take it, you know, pull it out of my output and put it into a Word document or whatever in vivo needs. So you might just have to do a little bit of work to extract the data out of it, but the data will be captured there for you. You know, and then you just have to make it into a format that in vivo needs.
Okay. Yep. Thank you.
No worries. Question from Ian was, can Qualtrics anonymize responses, and can you do some demonstrations? Yeah, so look, Qualtrics will by default be anonymous. So these responses here are all anonymized because the only identifier that we have in here is response ID. Now, if you want to capture some things in there that make it not anonymous, so things like, you know, an email address because you wanted to follow them up, one of the things that I've been doing with ethics, for example, is to say, at the end of the survey, I'm going to ask you for your contact details. And the end of survey element allows you to send people to another URL. So you might want to send them to your lab's webpage, for example, or you could send them to another survey. So that's precisely what I do. So I get them to fill in their anonymous survey first up. And then I say, all right, if you want to be followed up for future research, or you want to enter a prize draw or whatever, then we're now going to send you to another survey so that your email address is stored in a separate data set from your main responses. And so that's a way of both capturing their contact details for other purposes, like a prize draw and all that, but not having it stored next to their main responses here. So that works pretty well and gets around that issue. Again, there'll be a video to come on that because that is something that ethics keeps contacting me about and getting me to talk everyone through. So I'm going to put it into a video to show you how to do those sorts of things. That's a really handy thing to do and keeps everybody happy. For the respondent, it's a fairly seamless experience though. They don't necessarily notice that they're going to a different survey. It just, just loads the next page. One of the questions was, does Qualtrics have any embedded analysis like basic descriptive statistics like SurveyMonkey does? Yes, it does. So we're getting a thing called an add-on for our CQU license called StatsIQ, which will be able to run analyses in there. But also, even without that, there's basic things that you can do in the data and analysis view over here too. So you can play around with it there as well, just to get a basic sense of what's going on. So, you can get some cross tabs here, for example, between two variables and see what's going on. So yeah, there's, some really basic types of analyses here that you can do. Now I do have to run in a minute because I have a meeting. I'm sure you can see on my screen that I've got a meeting in 2 minutes. If you have any more questions, I will just say, by all means, please feel free to email me. So Alex Russell, and the email address is there in the slides as well. I'm pretty Googleable, so that's another way that you can catch me as well. Any other questions before we go? Is everyone as excited about Qualtrics as I am now? It's not bad, is it? It's pretty good, right?
Oh, me, Alex.
Yeah, good. That's what I like to hear. So yeah, I think it's a really wonderful platform that can be used for a lot of things. And, look, you're going to start by dipping your toes in the water and just doing some basic things to begin. But as you get into it a lot more, you'll see that there is so much that can be done. And like I said, I'm aiming to share that with a lot of videos that will be made freely available to everybody to have a look at too. Okay, so cool. Until next time, thank you, everybody. And thanks for all the lovely comments and thanks for coming. Talk to you all soon.
Thanks, Alex.
See ya.